Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. I love that everybody's already got this going. We've got Las Vegas, Tulsa, North Dakota, Pennsylvania, Chicago, people from South America, love it. We've got people from India, Massachusetts, Fresno, Idaho, love it. Thank you all for joining me this morning. We got Germany, love it. My Ireland, wow, Canada, this is international, Philippines. Love this. All right. Well, my name is Mattice. I am the founder and CEO of Civility Partners. We are a consulting firm focused on turning around toxic work environments and toxic behavior. Just to tell you a little bit about me and how Civility Partners was created, we've been in business for 14 years. I can't believe next year is our 15-year anniversary. Kind of crazy. So Civility Partners was started out of my own experience. I was the director of human resources for an organization, and another director, so he was my peer, he was not my boss, he was frustrating. He was an uber excessive micromanager. He just, was really trying to micromanage all sorts of people, even those he didn't manage, like me. He definitely made it very clear if he liked somebody or did not. So he treated people very differently. He yelled, he was snappy and snarly. And I also felt like he would kind of be insubordinate to the president of the organization. And so as the director of HR, I was dealing with all of the problems he was creating. Lots of people in my office wanting help dealing with him, lots of people quitting, and then I had to, fill their roles. And I also spent a lot of time in the president's office trying to convince him to deal with this behavior. And I'm assuming one of the reasons many of you are here is maybe you're in that same scenario. It's hard to get the C-suite to pay attention to a behavior like this because this person is often really driving results. So I started getting my master's degree while I was working there. My degree is in organizational communication or human communication inside of organizations. And I ended up doing all of my graduate research on the topic of workplace bullying. So you'll be hard pressed to find somebody else in America that's as knowledgeable about workplace bullying as I am, though there are a few of us out there. We're all friends. We all know each other. So I got out of graduate school. I wrote Back Off. That's my first book, Back Off, Your Kick-Ass Guide to Ending Bullying at Work. I've since written 2 more and started Civility Partners with a mission to create positive work environments. So Civility Partners essentially does 4 things. We do workforce surveys. So we do what we call a climate assessment, which means we're looking at things like engagement, job satisfaction, trust in leadership, internal communication. So a climate assessment is looking at a variety of things beyond engagement. I know a lot of you probably do engagement surveys. We're looking at a bigger picture. We also then take that data and work with the organization to develop an action plan for change and often help implement that plan once the plan has been created. So we're really using that data to create a very clear action plan to change where we need to make change. Of course, we do lots of training programs. We often deliver training as a system where it's not a one-off training. It's a series of trainings and office hours and coaching and all sorts of things working together. And then we also do coaching for Abrasive Leaders, which is what we're here to talk about today. We have served a huge array of clients over the years, and we've served a huge array of industries. And I know we all think our own industry is special or that we are unique, but in terms of workplace bullying, and this is one of the things that was really fascinating to me in graduate school as I was reading all these articles and studying, weirdly, workplace bullying unfolds in almost the very same way every time. And so because of that, I'm able to coach these individuals with a very methodical process. And I'm going to talk to you about that process today. I've also had the pleasure of being seen and cited in a lot of really cool places over the years. So that's all about Civility Partners and me. A few housekeeping items. One is use the chat, use the chat, use the chat. I have the chat open. I love to interact with the chat. By all means, feel free to chat with everyone. or if you want to send me a private message that I can answer publicly, happy to do that for you. So definitely interact with me on the chat. And then I see one question in the Q&A, I would ask that everyone avoid the Q&A. It's easier for me to focus on one box, but I will definitely get to your answer for you who put that question in the Q&A. Let's see, how to prevent getting people like this in the organization to start with. Great question, and I can definitely cover that. So we're going to talk a lot about what bullying is, why people engage in this behavior, because it's an odd behavior, right? And then give you some very clear tactics. I'm actually going to give you a really clear script to use when you're addressing bullying behavior. And then I'm going to talk you through a coaching method that I use to help these individuals make change. So let's get our fingers warmed up in that chat. What is toxic behavior? When you think about that phrase, what do you think of? So go ahead and use the chat. What do you think toxic behavior is? Let's get on the same page. Triangulation, retaliation, yelling, gossip, passive aggressive, negatively impacting the team, ignoring, sarcasm, isolating, divisive, eye rolling, microaggressions, controlling, narcissism, gaslighting, bad culture, dismissing, anything not aligned with expected behaviors in the handbook or code of conduct, undermining, taking credit, not accepting feedback. That's a huge problem with these individuals. Thank you for all of these comments. Let's see. Gossiping, bad mouthing, acts that create negative power imbalances. Yeah. So I wanted to ask that question because toxic is a harsh word, right? That's a big word. And I think a lot of organizations hesitate to use that word because it is a big word. It's like saying something is harassment. That's a big word. Alarm bells go off. And we try to avoid words like that. And hopefully people in our organization are not engaging in harassment, right? I want to give you a different spin on the word toxic and help you see that toxic behavior is anything that creates a negative impact on others. So I want to share this spectrum with you. And if you've been on one of my webinars before, I often show this spectrum as just really how I see the world, or how I see negative or toxic behaviors. Mary, we will not be sending the slides, but we will be sending a recording. Okay, so at one end of the spectrum, the low end, the less harmful end, we might say, one might assert, is incivility, microaggressions, conflict, behavior that's seemingly not a big deal, right? We don't have laws against being uncivil. Your code of conduct or your, somewhere in your policy, you might be asking people to be respectful, but we're not necessarily addressing disrespect. And so these are behaviors that are fairly ignored. Now, microaggressions have certainly, yes, Laura, I love your question. Microaggressions are on the low end. Yes, hear me out. So, and that's what I'm saying. They're on the low end of the spectrum because we don't regulate them. We tend to not really look at these types of behaviors at all. Your corporate policy handbook probably doesn't prohibit microaggressions. It doesn't prohibit incivility. Again, it might say we expect everyone to be respectful, but we're not necessarily managing that expectation correctly. We're not giving managers tools to address microaggressions. And so these are lower level because in HR, we're not necessarily paying attention to them. So what happens is these behaviors, incivility, microaggressions, or conflict, that can escalate into abusive conduct or workplace bullying. And you're right, Catherine, conflict absolutely can be very healthy, and it's important to have conflict. But there's a lot of, I like and better, and there's a lot of research that if conflict is left not managed or left unaddressed, that it can absolutely escalate into abusive conduct. It can escalate into workplace bullying. And I've actually seen one client, it was a manager and a supervisor, or a manager and an employee, and they were both complaining to HR that they were being bullied by the other one. And they had had some conflict over the years that never got resolved. And over time, both parties start to attempt to sort of win that conflict or get their power by engaging in behavior that's escalating into bullying. And, they're both accusing the other one of bullying them. So here's another place where I want you to be thinking, especially if you are in HR. We tend to, or what I hear a lot is that bullying is lower level harassment, or that, bullying doesn't rise to the level, I hate that phrase, of harassment. Well, I got news for you. Abusive conduct is all of those behaviors. Abusive conduct is workplace bullying, it's harassment, and it's mobbing or hazing. So bullying and harassment are the same things. They are the same things. The only difference is who you aim them at. So if I bully everyone, I am well within my legal rights to do that, right? So if you'd like to be a bully, just bully everyone and you'll be safe. If I bully a protected characteristic, then the law defines that as harassment and that becomes unlawful behavior. So the only difference between bullying and harassment is one's unlawful and one's not. And then also things like mobbing or hazing. So this is group bullying, right? Where the abusive conduct is perpetrated by a group. And then at the far end of the spectrum is workplace violence. So what I'm saying with this spectrum is we have a lot of behaviors that we're not really addressing. We're saying we consider them lower level. They're not something we're managing regularly. We're not really teaching managers how to manage incivility or address a gossip, for example. We are doing harassment prevention courses. Many of us are, but again, we're really focusing on that as around the legal perspective, and that's not the way to do it. There's a part two of that. You got to talk about the interpersonal relationships. And then in terms of violence, violence, yes, by a group, Taylor. Mobbing is by a group. So hazing, for example, just to give you an example, I did some training for a company that manufactures executive jets. So the culture is mostly men, lots of men who've worked there for a long time or been in that industry for a long time, and they were hazing the younger generation coming through. Nurses are also known for hazing. In nursing, they call it eating their young. So violence is the far end of the spectrum. And I want to make it clear too that workplace bullying and violence also have a lot of similarities. So for example, one individual that I coached, people described that when he got angry, his body language really changed. He became like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, where he was, his shoulders would go back, he'd puff his chest out, his face became very expressive, his eyes are getting big, the veins popping out of his forehead. That's violence. The only thing that has to happen in order for something to be violent is the other person has to fear for their physical safety. And that's, people are left fearing for their physical safety. Something else he would do is like rise up over his desk and lean over and get right in people's faces. That's workplace violence. And unfortunately, the organization did not address that person's behavior until someone had a panic attack after years of being at the receiving end of abusive conduct and some low-level violence or lots of psychological, lack of safety, that the one person finally had a panic attack. And then the organization decided we should probably address that. So just to go back to my comment about how harassment and bullying are so similar, understand that harassment is a form of employment discrimination. We know it's unwelcome conduct based on race, religion, sex, a variety of characteristics. And it's unlawful when enduring the conduct is a condition of employment or feels that way. And it's so severe or pervasive, a reasonable person would consider it intimidating, hostile, or abusive. Well, everything in that pink box, everything that makes harassment unlawful, that defines workplace bullying also. People who feel bullied absolutely feel like it's a condition of employment, and they absolutely feel like it's intimidating, hostile, or abusive. So if you need a business case for your leader to get them to pay attention to this behavior you're talking to them about and trying to get permission to solve this problem, if you've got people engaging in bullying, this might be one way to do it, is to just present that all it takes is one slip up, and a woman or a person of color or a colleague who identifies as gay is gonna use that at some point in the future. So it becomes a great business case for why this needs to be solved. Any other thoughts, questions, comments on this before I move on? Okay. The other thing I want to make sure we understand today is that toxic behavior is social. So let me just ask you a question. What's the number one reason people engage in bullying behavior? It is a big coffee cup, Mary. You got to be able to see my logo. What's the number one reason people behave in bullying or engage in bullying? Power. It works for them to show power. They can get away with it. Jealousy, control, ego, fear, insecurity, past trauma. Yeah, lots of reasons here. Thank you for keeping those coming. Let's see, who was it? Laura. Laura gets the gold star. They get away with it. And to fill a hole in their heart. Doesn't that make you feel sad for them? They don't feel good about themselves. Yeah. So the number one reason is they're allowed. They're doing it in your organization. So nobody's ever told them to stop. And in fact, people who engage in bullying are often rewarded, right? They're promoted, they're rainmakers. And so the CEO isn't interested in addressing it, right? The CEO is like, let's just leave it be because they bring in a lot of money or they have a lot of organizational knowledge. And so they're allowed. That's the number one reason. And yes, Laura, sad until you're the target. But what I want to do is shift your paradigm from it's their problem, and it is. It's a behavior that they need to have addressed. But also they're doing it inside the organization, and that's what that circle represents. They're doing it in your organization. Let's see, even when they're told to stop, if the victim of bullying is too afraid to speak up, they get away with it. Yeah, and it's not on the target to, it's a scary place to be, and I'm talking about the C-suite allowing it. Certainly I can give tips to targets about how to step up, but I understand there's a whole lot of fear. Even when you report them to your boss, then management and HR protects. Yeah, that's the impression I know a lot of targets have. I'm here to tell you that HR, I want to, just because I come from HR and I was that HR person, there was nothing I could do. I talked to the president all the time about this person, that was bullying, and to address it. He was my equal. I couldn't address it. And so I was that HR person who probably came across as protecting this person, and I can assure you I was not. So HR only has as much power as the CEO gives them. So most of the time the narrative is that HR is calling me and they've been trying to convince the CEO to address it for a long time. And eventually the CEO gets a slap in the face. There's some sort of catalyst that the CEO finally goes, all right, I hear you. We need to address this. Okay, so here's how toxic behavior works. The targets have counselors. So these are people that the target, talks with, kind of gets ad hoc advice or events to. So for example, when I was going through bullying, there was another director that I interacted with regularly, and I would often go in her office and close the door and complain to her. And then the person engaging in bullying also has counselors. So they're also talking to their friends or their peers. Maybe they're saying, gosh, that target is so incompetent. And their peers are going, yeah, I see that. So they've got their narrative and they've got their counselors that they're talking to. And then the toxic person engaging in toxic behavior also has advocates and allies. So using the CEO as an example, if HR is telling the CEO, I keep getting complaints about this person, you got to address it. And the CEO is consistently saying, no, don't address it, leave them be because they're valuable to this organization. The CEO is the advocate and ally for the toxic behavior without recognizing it, right? And then again, and then there's reinforcers. So reinforcers are anybody who's observing the behavior and isn't speaking up about it. So this is something we talk a lot about. In our trainings, we do an upstander training where we're talking to workforces about, if your silence does send a very loud message. And so we really try to get organizations when we're working with them to give their employees the tools to push back on bad behavior, so that it's not all on the CEO, right? We realize we can't rely on the CEO. The CEO may or may not, want to address its behavior. So if we can teach reinforcers, those people who observe it, but choose not to speak up, if we can teach them to speak up, there's going to be a huge power in that. And again, all of this is happening in your organizational context. So again, a big key to solving workplace bullying is to teach your workforce how to protect your positive and healthy workplace culture by giving them the tools to speak up. And then it becomes social pressure to live the culture the way it's supposed to be lived. Let me see. I saw lots of conversations here. Yeah, people. So yeah, that's another thing, Celeste. If you're in HR and you're getting complaints, a lot of times people say, I'm terrified, I don't want to report this. And unless the employee uses that phrase, hostile work environment, you may not, maybe you can't do an investigation, versus if they say I'm being harassed, you have to take action. And so some of it is just the verbiage. People feel like, well, I'll just hide. I'm just telling you about it. Let's see. I saw Jonathan. People often forget that HR are also employees with limited authority. Yep. So I do see that a lot in the conversations around bullying, that HR is protecting the bully, HR is on their side. That's just not been my experience as someone who receives those calls from HR saying, I finally got permission to get this person help. I know that they have been dealing with it for a long time, and often they also feel bullied, right? Yeah, my job is to plead the case as to why this isn't the best course of action. Thank you, Ricardo. Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes the bullies are in protective classes. Sure. Could I repeat what I said about teaching the workforce? Yes, Maria. So we do we call it from bystander to upstander. And, during Me Too, especially, a lot of organizations were like, if you see something, say something. We want you to, we can't fix it unless we know about it. The problem is that people aren't wired to throw themselves in front of a bus, right? We're not wired to go and make a big to-do about something, and if there's a threat on the other side. So we have to teach the organizational members what to look for, including microaggressions, inappropriate sarcasm, gossip, these lower level things. We have to teach the workforce how to keep an eye out for those things and how to step in, so that the organization, all the members are working together to create the culture. And it's not always, well, I'm just going to tell HR. Okay. Let's see, Kaylee, I reported harassment and discrimination. HR said they investigated and said there's no such thing. I requested to see the conversations about me, and they had very hateful content. Well, so Callie, I'll just address that, then I got to move on. There's a thing so that's where I'm talking about, that we got to see bullying and harassment as more similar than separate. Harassment's unlawful. So there's all sorts of required action items that go around that word harassment. So what I actually coach a lot of people who have been through an investigation. Somebody complained about a hostile work environment. There was an investigation, and the report comes back that says, well, technically it's not harassment, but this person's not behaving very well. People are using words like hostile and harassment. So while it's not unlawful behavior, it needs to be addressed. And then a smart CEO will agree with that comment and, go along with that. Does an ethics line help as a tool to speak up and prevent a toxic environment? Beatrice, there's a lot of those anonymous tools out there. I know there's the hotlines, there's a lot of apps now where employees can report stuff. And it can be useful for HR to monitor that and check patterns. But unless people are really honest to say, here's somebody who needs coaching, or here's somebody who, there's a lot more that goes into having an app like that. Yep, employers are worried about retaliation, or employees are worried about retaliation. Absolutely. So I'm not blaming those reinforcers. I'm not saying what's wrong with them for not speaking up. What I'm saying is the organization has to take it on to teach those people that and give that message. We want you to step in and we support you. And so it's a culture shift. It's a culture shift. Okay. So something else I want to share with you, and then we'll dive into the, more on bullying specifically. Also understand that there's a lot of risk factors for toxic behavior to flourish in an organization. So this is a short list. There's a much longer list of all of the various risk factors. But if we're talking about prevention, if we're talking about harassment prevention, if we're talking about preventing bad behavior, if we're talking about creating an inclusive work environment, that's another thing. If you've got any sort of DEI initiatives happening, you can maybe sneak this whole thing around bullying in there, because ultimately the opposite of bullying is everyone feeling included, right? So something to think about. But I see so many organizations ignore the risk factors. For example, if there's ambiguity in roles and responsibilities, that stresses people out. And actually, that number 7 there is the number one predictor of workplace bullying behavior. Bureaucracy is another example. If I have to go through a bunch of rules and regulations to get anything to happen, then that's frustrating for me. If I have pressure from all around me to get things done, I might start engaging in bullying, right? So what we need to do is be looking at our organization and addressing organizational problems. It's not just about the person engaging in the behavior. It's about the context that they're in. And that's why we do climate assessments, because then we can look at all of these things and figure out, where to go from here. What do we need to do to the culture? Why is ambiguity such a big factor? Because humans are designed to have expectations, right? We're designed to know what's supposed to happen next. We don't deal with change very well at all. And so, for example, during COVID, lots of ambiguity, and there isn't any evidence saying that bullying went up during COVID, but I am going to make an educated guess that it absolutely did, especially with isolated workspaces. So if I'm on Zoom with my manager and things are ambiguous and they're lost on what's supposed to be happening, they're going to engage in bullying. Let's see. It's difficult to report against a CEO. It's difficult to report against a CEO in any country. Yeah. Yep. Okay, great, Monica. Thanks for adding that on. So another action item for you. Take a screenshot of this slide and bring it to your leadership team and talk about it. And if you can address these risk factors, then you can start to engage in preventative behaviors, preventative initiatives. So, again, just leaning on the fact that this is happening in your organization, it's happening in your context. It's not necessarily just about the individual engaging in the behavior. There is a level of culture change that has to come with ending bullying or harassment and creating an inclusive work environment, right? And so these are the 3 things that we focus on when we're helping organizations change culture. And what that looks like is that we have to change behavior. We have to change the organization. We have to create processes and procedures that hold people accountable to the right behaviors. So, for example, putting your core values into your performance management system as core competencies. That's an example of a process that's going to hold people accountable to good behavior. And then we work with the leadership team to help make change as well. I see lots of questions. Let me see here. What should we do with a bully union steward who makes friends with management to block any action taken by the union in favor of employees? Mana, I don't know. I have definitely been in environments where the union was part of the problem. So I know unions are supposed to be good, but I've seen a lot of abuse of unions. For example, I worked with it was an ER at a hospital, and the union steward was the main kind of ringleader of bullying. And HR was telling me that every time they try to hold her accountable to being more respectful of the people around her, she would just threaten, union stuff. So I don't know. I know, maybe the next time you're doing your collective bargaining, we can throw some things in there around respect. I don't have an answer because unions are a lot like higher ed, a lot like universities, right? That you have tenured professors that you can't get rid of unless they murder or rob somebody. So it's, I don't have an answer. I wish I did. Patricia, based on your studies, are bullies normally leaders, or do you see a lot of employees bullying other employees? So absolutely, employees can be bullies. But I think what happens is it's easier to let that employee go, right? So if somebody's creating problems, it's easier for HR to lead the manager of that person through a disciplinary process. Versus the type of people I coach, they're often executive VPs or CEOs of a particular business unit, where they are just seen as so knowledgeable and so important to the organization that's why I'm being asked to coach them. The organization wants to keep them, but needs them to change. So anybody and everybody can be a bully. It's easier to deal with them when they're kind of lower level. Why is there a demarcation between the terms bullying and harassment? Why does HR split hairs over these terms when the bottom line is behavior is unethical? Totally agreed. It's contrary to team objectives and ad hominem. Totally agreed. Totally agreed. And that is my mission in life, is to help HR recognize that bullying and harassment are the same. The problem is that, at least in the United States, harassment is unlawful behavior and bullying is not. So if you have an HR professional in your organization who's too focused on compliance, then they're going to split hairs. Versus if you have an HR professional who is more focused on culture, hopefully, they can help say, hey, maybe it's not technically unlawful behavior, but it's still a huge problem. Ellen's got a response for you. Vote out your union steward. Okay. What is the best way to recruit based on core values, competencies? I'll answer that because we had that in the Q&A as well. So a lot of organizations create core values and then they don't do anything with them, right? So they're on the website. I know in lots of my presentations when I've talked to HR about this, it's like, we use our core values for recruiting, but then we don't really do anything else with it. And that's a huge problem. So while things like bullying or gossip or microaggressions are not unlawful, you can use your core values to hold people accountable. And so, for example, and actually, I think I'm actually going to answer this question a little bit later. We have a matrix for words like inclusivity. What does that mean? And how can you measure someone on their ability to be inclusive? So to answer your question, Kathleen, I would say asking some behavior-based interview questions. If one of your core values is respect, for example, you might ask a question like, tell me about a time you didn't respect somebody you worked with. Why didn't you respect them? How did you get along with them? How did you make it work? So that's my thought, is to really use, I don't know that there's a score or a test you could give. What percentage stays to deal with bullying versus those who leave? Unfortunately, Gerard, most people stay. I couldn't give you that percentage to say that, here's how many stay, but I can tell you that it's super damaging, and it's like being in an abusive relationship or abusive marriage. And it's so easy as an outsider to go, well, if you feel bullied, just leave. But it's just like we might tell someone who's in an abusive marriage, just leave. It's not that simple. And people who are at the receiving end of bullying, there's tons of research that they can develop PTSD. They have, I know, 11% more ideas around suicide. It's depression, it's headaches and heartaches. So it's a lot. Yeah, it really does mess with your self-esteem. Let's see. In our org, current leadership views bullying as harassment. That was included in core values. I love it. Great to hear that, Catherine. Okay, 75% of people who feel harassed never report it. And that's because all of the things we were talking about earlier, they're afraid of retaliation. Again, this is happening in your organization's context. So you've got to ask yourself, why are people afraid of retaliation? What's happening in this organization or not happening in this organization that causes people to fear retaliation in this organization? So it's not a them problem, it's a organizational problem. And so that's part of this culture shift. You've got to get people feeling a lot more comfortable to report bad behavior. I'll also share, again, a lot of times when there's a hostile work environment complaint, HR does the investigation, and that is focused, it's like Law and Order, right? It's focused on the facts. It's focused on determining if there was unlawful behavior or not. And if it turns out that there was, maybe we can solve that problem for that particular little dynamic. An organizational assessment is looking at perceptions. It's looking at everyone's reality. And we can look at the collective reality, and we can say 80% of people don't trust their leader, or 100% of people would refer this place as a good place to work. So we can understand the collective perceptions of the organization, and then we can solve problems, and we can say, well, look, it looks like the younger, people who are 30 and below in your organization feel a certain way. They're not too happy. We can address that and make changes. So I always recommend a climate assessment. Of course, we'd be happy to do that for you, but just recognize that investigation is a small piece of the puzzle. I always recommend doing an assessment as well. You got to find out, what's this dynamic? It's not just about the unlawful and lawful behaviors. It's this, there's something happening, and it's not good, and it's happening in the walls of this organization, and we need to understand why, and we need to do a climate assessment. Okay, so coaching abrasive leaders. We do tend to vilify them. We call them psychopaths. We call them brutal bosses and their prey. So we're calling them animals, or we call them both animals and psychopaths, all in the same phrase. So we do villainize them, and I get why, as someone who was at the receiving end, totally get it. And I know this person is seen as very frustrating, but they're also seen as valuable by the C-suite. And everyone is running away, mostly the C-suite. So again, HR is in a position where they're getting complaints and they're trying to talk to the C-suite about it, and the C-suite is not willing to address it. So I do have something cool for you. If you need to make that business case, I would email us at info@civilitypartners.com. We actually have a diagnostic that was created by a gentleman named Mark Barrell in collaboration with Dr. Laura Crawshaw, who is the person who taught me how to do this coaching. So it's a cool diagnostic, and it just asks a bunch of questions about behaviors, and then you can take that to your CEO and say, look, this diagnostic is saying that this person's behavior needs to be addressed, right? And the key is that these people can change. They're people. They can change. How many of you might agree with me? Do you feel like, I'm raising my hand, like you should raise your hand? Raise your hand or type in the chat. Do you think they can change? It depends. In my case, no. They can pretend to change. Sometimes. I hope they can. Proof's in the pudding. If they want to. Yes, absolutely, Laurel. If they have the desire. Yep. No, Mana says, no way. For my case, no, rarely. Yeah, so there's a If someone has been with the company since the 80s, do you think they are calcified in their ways and beholden to their biases? Unfortunately, those type of people are going to be a lot harder to change, right? Especially if leadership's never, ever told them they can't act that way. So I'm not a miracle worker. When I coach, I'm very much in partnership with the organization and ensuring the organization is holding them accountable. Okay, we're not falling into age. Well, Laura, I hear you. Let's not fall into ageism. Of course, it's not about how old they are. It's if they've been there since the 80s and they've never been told not to change, or if they've been there for the last 3 years and they've never been told not to change. Okay, 2 owners got a business coach and they're slowly changing. That's awesome. Okay. So I hate to use the word bullies, then we're name calling. So you might have noticed I tend to try to say people who engage in bullying. So I'm going to use the phrase abrasive leaders. And this is anybody who's causing distress. So they actually don't have to be straight up, mean people engaging in bullying. It's anybody who's causing distress and they're disrupting organizational functioning. So as I mentioned, there's a ton of research on the kinds of problems that these people create. This is another great kind of business case slide. And so here's my kind of book report or summary on the 40 years of academic research out there on workplace bullying. People at the receiving end, all of these things are going up. Turnover, wasted time, depression. I can tell you, I got depressed. I was fired from that job because I wasn't doing my work. I was just kind of coming to work and hanging around my office and then leaving. And of course, all this other stuff goes down. We want those arrows to be flipped. We want quality of work to be going up. We want safety to be going up. We want loyalty to be going up. So, this is backwards. And so when we get hired for any of the types of things that we do, we're focusing on flipping those arrows. So what is abrasive leadership or bullying? Well, what we find is that behavior always falls into one of 3 categories. And what I've noticed is all 3 categories are always present when we're calling people bullies. So the first is aggressive communication. So yelling, that guy I described, kind of getting in people's personal space, abusive emails, that type of thing. Humiliation, pointing out mistakes in public, shaming people in public, playing tricks on people, that inappropriate sarcasm or gossip. And then lastly, manipulation. So for example, giving someone a ton of work due, it's 10:42 in San Diego. This is due by 5 o'clock before you leave. And there's just no way, it's 3 days of work and I'm asking you to do it by 5 o'clock today, or changing work tasks so often that it's confusing. Often using performance evaluations to say someone's a poor performer when maybe they're not. And also that manager should have been coaching that poor performer and not just waiting until the eval, right? So definitely think about some of the bullying behaviors you've witnessed or heard about. And I think you'll find they definitely always fall into one of these 3 categories. So here's where I'm going to blow your mind. The assumption is that these people are fully aware of their behavior, that they intend to cause harm, that they can't change. The CEO thinks they'll quit if this person's called out, and there's something wrong with them. The reality is that they're fully unaware of the damage they cause. Their intention is to get the job done. They can change. And they'll want to change if they're called out. And it means there's something wrong with the organization, not the person. So, we've all engaged in behaviors at work that probably cause someone harm. The organization, if they never tell us to stop doing that, we start to develop power around that and we continue to engage in that behavior. I have never had somebody just up and quit because they were asked to engage in coaching. So in terms of some examples of this, so fully unaware. So this is an individual I coached when we met for the first time, and I was just kind of asking him about coaching and how he's feeling. He said, I've been walking around like an asshole for 3 years and nobody told me. I wish they'd told me sooner. Now, the thing is that he had been told, HR had been talking to him, but because these individuals lack emotional intelligence, he wasn't really understanding what she was saying. So what I find when I first meet with my clients is they're aware that people think of them as tough or hard, but they're not fully aware of what that really truly means and how much damage they're causing. The intention is to get the job done. This is another individual I coached. My boss tells me I'm responsible for 5,000 paychecks. There's no room for errors. So he was infamous for getting after you if he thought you had a stupid idea. In fact, he loved humiliation. People said that he would lean back in his chair and go like this and put his feet up on the desk and give you a dissertation about why your idea was so dumb. And so, of course, that's humiliating. Okay, so the 3 reasons people bully. They're seeking competence. So what I found is they are fighters. They have been fighting to look competent and, to be the most successful and smartest person in the room. They've been fighting that their whole lives. They all have stories about doing this. I've coached a guy he was the CEO of a geographical location for a multi-billion-dollar global organization. He'd made it. He reported to the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar global organization. That was his direct boss. And he was still fighting for attention from, trying to get attention from his father and among all the kids when he was a kid. Another woman was from China. She came to the United States, didn't speak English, literally grew up on the crumbs of her siblings because she was the youngest and she was a girl, and worked her way up to having a PhD and running a quality control department at a pharmaceutical company. So they all have a story like that. And that's how they've become, that's how they've grown. And then, of course, they're lacking empathy, and because they're so focused on incompetence, it makes them anxious and they defend. So what I'm talking about is fight or flight. They feel threatened by perceived incompetence. That makes them anxious and they engage in a defense mechanism. So for them, it's fight. And then the CEO feels threatened by this person. They have anxiety around firing them or talking to them, and they engage in flight. So all of this behavior can be boiled down to fight or flight. And in all honesty, I use this model in my coaching. So my job is to help this individual figure out how to work through their anxieties around incompetence. My job is to help them understand you don't have to fight anymore. People think you're competent and you're not the competence crusader. Use your powers for good. So as all of you know who are in HR, bullying is indeed a performance problem. Just because it's not unlawful, it doesn't mean you can't address it. We get people who, you have someone who shows up late to work all the time. Eventually, we're going to fire them. It's a performance problem. Any behavior doesn't have to be unlawful. If there's a behavior that's disruptive, it's a performance problem. Okay, there are 3 steps to intervention. So these are the scripts I was talking about earlier. So what if they're called out and don't accept responsibility? Maria, these slides are for you. The 3 steps to intervention: make them see, make them care, and get them help. And so that's what I'm going to talk you through here. So how do you make them see? The answer, Maria, the short version is stop getting caught up in the facts. That's HR's problem, right? Everything is about investigating. Is it lawful or unlawful? Did they violate a policy or not? I operate in perceptions. So what you're going to say is, we've had a stream of complaints about perceptions of interactions with you. This is not acceptable. And then in true form, they're going to say, nah, it's not true. Don't you want to hear my side? They're just sensitive. I'm trying to manage them. They're a bunch of slackers. They're going to justify and deny. And what you're going to say in response is, I don't know what happened. I don't work with you. I'm not there. I do know the only fact I need is that several people feel like they're being treated disrespectfully. That's the only fact I need. That has to change. So it's not you're broken, change your ways. It's, I'm not going to fact battle with you. I don't know, but I can tell you that people are perceived or perceiving that you're a certain way. And because there's a steady stream of these complaints, I have to see that as a bit of reality, right? And so then you're charging this person with changing the perceptions of them. Jacqueline, when the bully, sounds like bullies when approached begin to use victim language. Yep. So this is the same thing. I've got to help you change this perception of you. Okay. Then you've got to make them care. So I actually don't take coaching clients unless there's a consequence in place. And it does sometimes take the CEO some convincing. But often, again, I'm getting called because the CEO had some sort of slap in the face. Somebody filed a hostile work environment complaint, or their friend's company is getting sued and they're realizing it's dangerous, or I don't know, another really important person quit and cited this other person, so it's like, well, now we got important people quitting too. And so there has to be a consequence in place, and it doesn't have to be termination. So these are some examples. I coached a doctor who was told she was going to be removed from a very kind of high visibility, good career type of role on a committee at the hospital. She was going to be removed from that committee. Or we're going to change your responsibility. You're going to be demoted. We can't have you be a manager. I've also, a lot of times you could say, look, right now you're a VP, and I know you really want to be an executive VP. I can't help you get there if you don't change. So the consequence is kind of like you've hit your ceiling as long as you continue to act this way. I see your questions. I'm going to get through some of this, and then I'm happy to stay on at the end and answer any of those questions if you all want to stay. So when I'm coaching individuals, I'm focused on 3 questions. So far, this individual I'm coaching doesn't really know the negative perceptions, right? It's been delivered to them as hearsay from HR or the CEO that people perceive you as abrasive. I hear people say things like you shame them in public, this or that, but it's all, again, hearsay. So we've got to start by understanding the negative perceptions, and then we can start to dig into, well, why do people perceive you that way? And how can we change those perceptions? So in order to understand the negative perceptions, what we do is interview roughly 15 people. And then what we do is take all of those interview notes, we move them all into themes, and then I read that document to the individual. So it's no longer HR saying you intimidate people. It's, here are the words of the 15 people I interviewed. And again, this is not an investigation. I'm not asking for facts. I'm trying to understand perceptions of the leader. So this is the key to helping someone recognize the impact they have. A lot of times at this point, they're going, oh my gosh, I wouldn't want to work with me either. I didn't know it was this bad. Oh my goodness, they're upset. And so that's how I know most of the time these people do care. They just didn't know how bad it was. And then from there, we focus on, well, why do people see you this way, and what are the strategies? So just to give you an example of a very real conversation, I have an individual I'm coaching who one of his themes is he's kind of egotistical. And he has all sorts of big stories. He loves to name drop and all this stuff. So he was telling me, well, people don't talk to me about what they did over the weekend. When I ask, they kind of I don't understand that. I have this Monday morning team meeting and I'm like, how was your weekend? And nobody shares. And it's like, well, why? And his answer is literally, well, I think they're probably ashamed of their activities. If they watched Netflix all weekend, they're ashamed of that, or they know they can't compete with my cool stories. And then it's like, well, maybe they think you're egotistical. That was one of your themes. And what can we do to eliminate this perception that you're egotistical? And so then we started talking about being more humble. So this is an example of a very real coaching conversation. And just to share how cool this is, so Mercedes is one of my clients. She was working in an insurance agency. And so here were some of what was on that feedback document I read to her. And then after about 4 months of coaching, we re-interview everyone and found a whole lot of change. So it was really, really cool. This is what I see a lot. And then it's up to the organization to hold these people accountable to this behavior, right? It's up to the organization to then make sure Mercedes stays that way. I also want to share again, this whole thing is about culture change. So there's a lot of types of training systems and programs that we recommend if you're focused on creating an inclusive work environment or a respectful work environment. And these are the types of training topics that we're delivering. We have a whole bunch more, but teaching managers and leaders, for example, to hold people accountable to civility, so that we're not doing things like microaggressions, and teaching managers how to listen for microaggressions and address them, so that it doesn't escalate, right? And then everybody needs communication skills. We're not that great at communicating. If we were, we wouldn't have lawyers and therapists and all of that, right? So here is the activity ID if you are looking to get continuing education credits for SHRM. So I'll just leave that up there for a second. It's 23YMGM3. And I also wanted to share that we have another webinar coming up on August 30th. So this is kind of more like dealing with toxic people at work, individual to individual. And so happy to have you there. We'd love it if you were there. So if you want to take a snapshot of that, we will get you registered. And thank you, Zahid. I appreciate that. Pam, I will everyone's asking for the code. Let me just give one more thing and then I'll put the code back up. So just wanted to get everyone, definitely email. Oh, thanks, Jessica. Jessica's got it for you. Email us at info@civilitypartners.com. We will send you the link to the diagnostic. We will send you an ebook on coaching. And we will send you a kind of a handout, a 2-page document of being an ally, 16 scripts for being an ally. Happy to chat with any of you, happy to stay on a little bit here and answer any questions I didn't get answered. Or you can shoot us an email at info@, and I can definitely answer them there. And thank you everyone for all of your participation. Think of us if you need to turn around some toxic behavior or culture. Thank you. Nice to see you. I do not know Mary Ellen. Maybe we need to make a intro. Thank you all. I appreciate it. Thank you. Yes, the QR code for the training is here, or the next webinar. Is that what you were looking for, Ricardo? Laurel, I don't think we have HRCI credits, but I know you can sometimes use, kind of random programs like this one that we don't have a code for. You could still probably use it. The recording will be emailed. Yes, please feel free to share it. We would love to have you share it. Can you do a webinar regarding issues within HR? Who do you go to then? I don't know if I can do a whole webinar on it, Heidi, but I'm happy to chat with you. Yes, here is the code. Thank you all. Thank you. Feel free to type in questions if you wanted to get them answered here. There are enough problems in HR to create a webinar. It's just that there's so many. I don't know how methodical I could make it. How long is each coaching session on average? So the coaching starts off being 90-minute coaching sessions for the first 4 weeks. And then I switch to an hour every other week after those first 4. Yeah. So it's probably about 20 hours of the leader's time. It's not a ton. And because they're high performers, they're interested in change, right? They generally want to be seen as competent. And so when I give them that feedback that essentially says, you're not competent at leading, they're very interested in change. So it's only between 8 and 12 sessions. And if you want to, I never share pricing out there in the world. If you want to contact, we actually also have a couple tiers of coaching. We have 3 tiers, so budget depending on what you're trying to accomplish with coaching. So Anne, by all means, email us at info@. Let me put that back up, and would love to hop on a call with you, and we can talk about what you're trying to accomplish and which coaching tier might be best. Does the coaching model exist in the book? Yep, it's in this Abrasive Leaders ebook. So just shoot an email over and we will send you that ebook. That's where that coaching model's going to be found, and along with some case studies and things. Any other questions? All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for being here. Those of you left, appreciate you. And we'll see you on the next webinar.